Hi, my name is Eric Howell, and we're here with the Keizer Oral History Project discussing the formation of Keizer Little League and the Keizer Little League fields. So my first question for you folks is, where did kids play before you guys formed Keizer Little League, and how did you see the need developing for this more established program?
What I remember is when 3 of my boys were of softball age, the only program in Keizer was by Harry Pease, and he formed the amount of teams for the number of students that wanted to play. So Michael, my youngest, born in '69, was a baby, and I remember carting a playpen to Keizer School, the old Keizer School on the corner of Shamawa Road, and the ball games were there on weekends. And after that summer, I believe it was Max Martin, and I may be wrong, but I believe Max was the originator of Keizer Little League, responsible for getting the people together where to play, which was at Kennedy Elementary, and it took off from there. We began the year with 6 major league teams the following year in 1972, and 12 minor league teams. And the kids were all 8 to 12. Right. That's when they began. Mm-hmm.
How about you, Jim? How did you see the need forming?
So I first got involved in 1979 when our son started playing, when playing more games. And it just got to the point where the priorities between what the school district wanted their fields or their property managed and what the Little League needed just were becoming more and more incompatible all the time. And there were lots of issues with parking in neighborhoods that some neighbors didn't like it in different times. So it just had become really obvious that something different needed to be done, that we needed our own complex. And that was 1979.
And I got involved in the mid-1980s. When I got involved, of course, the complex was already there. None of the structures were there. We had a large semi-truck trailer on blocks, and that's where we put all the equipment with a big padlock on the door. But one of the reasons...
And we had that concession stand, that little tiny thing that we used to have down at Kennedy School, I guess. We hauled up there on a trailer and just about dumped it off into the ditch. But
that's right.
Those were the only 2 things we had there.
But the reason that Keizer Little League became so successful, and I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, is because your family could go to one location for the evening and your kids could play in all the different divisions. Most of the other leagues by then were still playing at multiple sites. And that was one of the best things that I think came about with establishing Little League fields, is having one place for families to go on the evening. And the kids that were playing on the T-ball field were so excited after they went and got their treat at the concession stand, of course. They would go down to the senior field and watch the big guys play and say, someday I'm going to play at that field. And that the other leagues didn't have that. I mean, that's one of the greatest things about Keizer Little League, is the kids would go to each field the next year and I got to this field and I'm going to get to the next field because of the progression in their abilities and so forth. So that was a great part of it.
Sure. I, with Rick, joined in 1979 when my son was 8 years old, and I was recruited to be a coach for the T-ball, the little boys' T-ball teams. And I was probably one of the first women coaches that coached T-ball at that particular time, and I have to say I won the championship, beat Keizer Rotary. That's the way it goes some days. Anyway, Rick is correct. We were playing on many different schools. Parking was a problem, and there was an opportunity that came that they had dug out where the Kaiser Little League fields are now at Ridgeway, up on Ridge Drive, it was used for the highway division, correct? That we put, that we could use for $1 a year. And what it enabled us to do was we could not anchor anything on the field grounds. It all had to be movable. So for $1 a year, that's when, and I'll let Rick and Marion talk about it, that the state highway that Rick worked for, he can go into detail there, but that's how it all started because of the National Guard. So I think that's how I got involved, and when they started doing it, because I was in sales and around, I got to be the director of raising the money for the fields. And that was a tremendous responsibility because we wanted to develop 9 fields. And developing 9 fields and just having the grass put on it, let alone the sprinkling systems, let alone the weed control, was quite an undertaking for a group of volunteers from the city to do.
So my next question is, you saw a need developing. How did you we didn't have things like internet and Twitter and Facebook and all these other wonderful social networking things that let us do things quicker. How did you start formulating the communication network that you used to kind of get the word out that you wanted to do something bigger for Kaiser Little League? And how did you start recruiting other people into that vision?
Yeah, how did we do that without Facebook? I don't know how we did that, but I think it was a relatively small group for one thing, I think, in the very beginning.
In fact, didn't you call it a dirty dozen?
Well,
That was later.
That was when we actually
79.
started
That was later,
building,
okay.
yeah.
it was really 6 of us.
There was,
did it.
I remember a meeting at Marion's house over on the park there.
Mandarin.
Mandarin Park, yeah, or Willard, isn't it? Yeah.
Willard Park.
Where there were probably about a half a dozen of us or so there that all had just the right expertise to come together. Joanne was doing the fundraising. In my position at ODOT, I was in a position where I could get the permit to use the property. Ray was the construction guy. Bob Newton was the guy that brought the National Guard in. I mean, we never would have got off the ground without that big first push that we had. So I think that's how our early communication
That
was.
would have
Marion,
been
you want to say something?
1979.
Yeah. it
And
was.
later. But in the early years, it was just 3 or 4 gentlemen that actually began the program, because we had only, 12 minor teams and 6 major teams the first year. And then the second year, it grew to 8 major, 8 minor, and 7 minor too. And each successive year, it continued to grow, so that by the time we left Kennedy, we were playing on Kennedy, Kaiser, and Cummings. And parents like myself had boys everywhere. And then, of course, the girls program, the softball program began. And it's just interested people that heard the word and would talk at a baseball game. Mm-hmm. And that's how it developed.
So tell me a little bit, what were the first steps you took in actually constructing the fields out there? Obviously you had to get permission to get the land for $1 a year, but what came after that? What was next?
Yeah, in my position at ODOT, I had responsibility for that property, and it was surplus property, as Joanne said. The earth that was used for the original Shamawa, well, not the original, but the rebuild of the Shamawa overcrossing, it came from this property. So, and the property had become a real liability for ODOT. People were tearing around out there on motorcycles and doing all kinds of things that was becoming a real liability for ODOT. When we started talking about needing a place, that came to mind. And through that, I was able to talk to my supervisors, because I was kind of concerned, is there a conflict of interest here, and everybody said, no, this is a great cause. And so we did write a land use permit, and we built the field. The very first step as far as construction was concerned was the National Guard's effort. They used it as their 2-week summer camp training program. Marion, do you want to say anything more about that before I go on?
Well, it took about 2 years of planning and development, but Ray Cox first did the plans as an engineer, and then the Guard was enlisted to get permission to do this over a 2-year period. And then there were a group of 12 gentlemen who put it all together, working nights, weekends, every spare minute to put the project together.
Yeah, that was right after right after the season ended in 1980s, and in that shortly after that was when the National Guard came in and did their 2-week thing, and then J.B. Sod came in and sprayed their, grass seed over the entire complex. Ultimately, the whole thing wouldn't be grass, but that's how we started, with everything grass. And then, we just went to work then all through the rest of the summer, through the fall, through the winter of 80, 81, and had it ready for kids to play on in April of 81. There's one story I always remember. We were down on the lower part, and it was just raining like crazy, and we were trying to put in fence posts. And several guys were out there with post hole diggers digging post holes, and so there was a lot of noise, post hole diggers going, so there was a lot of noise. I remember Mike Gaynor shouting over all that noise to somebody. He said, I used to remember when the hardest thing about Little League was picking up the T-shirts. And we were out there in mud up to our knees and raining. And so that first push of initial field construction was summer and fall and early winter of 80 and winter and spring of 81.
Mm-hmm. What other site, I should have asked this before, what other sites did you look at when you were considering places to put this, or was this kind of the one that rose to the top very quickly?
This was the one that rose to the top. I mean, there may have been people that have thought of something, but I don't know of any other place here in Keizer where there were that many fields together in one spot anyway.
I guess what people don't necessarily consider, I mean, we go out there to that park now and it's all just kind of been there for years. What were the things that came up that you weren't thinking about when you just say, hey, we're going to put baseball fields out there, that became hurdles that you had to kind of clear in the construction of it?
Drainage?
Yeah, drainage. And some of those, the way ODOT left that property, it started up at what used to be called Ridge Road at the east end, and they excavated it on a uniform slope to the west. So down where the big senior field is, that's the lowest spot on the whole property. And so how do you get water out of that field so it doesn't become just a lake? And there was a major storm drain that was deep underground there that we plumbed into. So there's a huge inlet down there, and all the other fields kind of drain towards that point and then it's picked up in other ways. But at that lowest point, there's a major drainage down there. I think another hurdle, and Dave, you got involved in 85. I think this was right before that, where we actually had to move one of the fields. When we first developed out there, the Keizer Parkway was a concept, but nobody knew if it would ever be built. And it wasn't all that long after we got the complex underway that ODOT got the funding to build the Salem Parkway. And so there's a frontage road up there that's right next to the fields there now. where that right-of-way was closer to the fields than what we anticipated it would be. And so we got a notice from ODOT that we had to move one field or they would just destroy it. And so through volunteers, literally in one weekend, we picked that field up and moved everything. Moved, sod, baselines, out the dugout, fencing and everything. And started right after the game was done on Friday, and then they played on, I think it was a Memorial Day weekend, because then they played on it Tuesday night, the next week, in the new
That's
location.
amazing.
Well, I remember, my husband at the time was around chemicals and spraying, so we had a lot of spraying, a lot of weeds that were taken care of. But I can remember loading fences from all the schools on the back of pickups and carrying them to the fields when they were ready. And I remember just the tremendous support we got from the parents and the community to move this. There might have been 6 of us originally and then 12, but it could have never been done without the parents and people really seeing the vision of it. But it was very exciting, and we had a strong leader at that particular time. His name was Bill Rumpf, who really knew how to put things together and could motivate people, was just wonderful. It was a sad day when he moved on to Seattle and we lost him, but the Little League field's still named after him. But he was the main contributor to this, with everybody else contributing.
Yeah, I might add on that note too, I think it's appropriate that Bill actually took out a personal loan with his business as equity to provide some of that
That's
very early funding. We did it on not very much money, but what little bit of money we did have really came from that.
And then the fundraisers we'd have with the parents selling. Burger King helped us a lot with coupons and parents. That's how we did it. And donations mainly from JB Sod donated, so a field was named after them. So the big fields out there were named after very big contributors, is how we decided to do it. Of course, Keizer Rotary gave us a lot of money. It just was a really community effort.
Well, I was just going to comment about the number of people that got involved. Back then, and I don't know if it has to do with the society of today and the busyness of parents and families and so forth, but back then, everybody, that was kind of your life. You could do Little League because that was what everybody did, and the parents loved it. My son was not old enough to play back then, but he was out there every night watching his sisters, and one little cute story about him, there was a little electric fence between him and the cows. Well, he found that electric fence just one time, though. He didn't find it out. And so, but then Mike grew up and went on to play. But Joanne's right. I mean, it was just a feeling of that's part of the community. I know there's a couple of people in Keizer that talk about, well, there's several people in Keizer talk about a couple of things that are just the greatest thing as far as legacy of Keizer, and Keizer Little League is one of them. Keizer Fire Department's the other, and Keizer Rotary is the other. And the Little League back at the time, I mean, it was the thing to do. And I don't know if we'll talk on it or not, but we had a guy named Mike Ells, and Mike had the ability to schedule. At one time, we had over 1,000 kids, but he scheduled those games. He scheduled those games 5 days a week. And so on the weekends, the parents could go camping or do whatever they wanted. Now, we had makeup games if it rained or something, but that was one of the best things, and I think that's why we got so much support, is that parents were not hooked into baseball or softball the entire summer. They could do it those 5 days a week and still go have their vacation on the weekends, and I think that really helped.
It was based on National Little League, so everything at National Little League level is done from the 12-year-olds back from the National Little League plays. So that really put us not playing much baseball in the summer, but in the spring. So kids were in school where you didn't have summer vacations, It really started about in April, and then I spent many a cold nights up on that field with the winds and the rains, but it was just sheer dedication. Like you said, there's the fire department, Kaiser Little League, and Rotary, but I've seen this come again one other time, and that's when we moved the old Kaiser School to its spot here on the city property. That kind of spirit that Kaiser raises to it when it's needed, and it's just very exciting. But there was at one time, because I was raising money and having the teams do the money, the selling of tickets and that, there was over 1,000 kids in Little League, and you figure out about 20 kids a team. We were fielding huge amounts. But what was more impressive for me personally was the development of the softball program. You're talking about this time almost just short of Title IX stuff, but our program has always been huge for women's softball, and both of these programs have fed into big, huge state titles for McNary High School because of the development that they got from just volunteers. But it was just as equally as big on the softball side as it was on the baseball side. And so that just developed from being able to all be on one field at one time, and the commitment by the parents at that time.
And it looks like we're into Kaiser Little League versus the fields, because I think that that's important. If you want to stay on the fields, we can do that, or if you want to go to, okay, if you want to go to Little League, I think the important piece about Little League that we always had was we had some support at that time from McNary High School. Vic Backlund would come over and give our coaches a clinic, so that the support that we received from the school level, from the high school level, was incredible. And those kids worked their way up through Little League to win those championships. And to follow up with what Joanne said, we had the same with the softball program. We had that support of the high school, and that's how we were able to, as a community, having one high school and the spirit that Kaiser has,
I have to bring up a fun thing that happened at some of our board meetings. We were so successful in winning titles that we had 7, 8, 9 teams starting to go through the United States to play some games at different divisions. And we were just sweating. We never had the money in the coffers to send them. And how were we going to send all these teams that kept winning and with their parents? And that turned out to be a fun crisis. But it's still just raising the money just to support all this was something else.
And I'll follow up just on one story about that. Before we had the Chamber of Commerce help out there, we had the Kaiser Merchant Association, and my family's always been involved in that. And we got calls at our office. I got a call one day from a lady somewhere in California, and her husband was being transferred to Oregon, and specifically into the Salem area. And she knew so much about Kaiser Little League because her daughter played softball. And she wanted to know where the best place in Kaiser was to live, and she wanted to know all about Kaiser. So we put together a packet, sent her stuff. I talked to a couple of people at the real estate offices in Kaiser, and we sent her stuff. And she moved here just so her child could play at Kaiser Little League. And that's the follow-up of what Joanne was saying. When we have 8 or 9 teams out across the country playing softball, people knew about Kaiser Little League. As president, I was president for 2 years, and there was 10 possible district championships, and we won 9 out of the 10 2 years in a row. I mean, we won 19 out of 20.
Yeah.
And it was pretty impressive because we've got a flag, and we built, how many times did we rebuild that flagpole?
We put 2 extra cables.
Yeah, we
on
put
it.
2 extra cables, so the other teams in the district, Kaiser would host, And they'd come in and they'd see all of these district flags out there. And that was a little kind of a mind game with the coaches and the kids that we played, that, we put up all of those flags so that they could see them. And I heard the coach from another league say, yeah, I knew that you guys put up the flags this morning because the whole earth tilted sideways.
Somebody could tell me a little bit how the softball program kind of grew out of the baseball program. I'd be curious to know a little bit more about that.
I'm not sure what year that was, but I'm thinking, in '76, we had 10 major minor softball teams and 4 seniors. So we had expanded by 1976 to softball. I think that's about the year it happened, because I know Debbie Meyer was one of the first, and I got to keep score for them that first year. And I believe another group of softballers.
Yes.
Yes,
There
I'm
was
sorry.
families that literally had daughters that just, for years,
Oh,
you
yeah,
would
yeah.
hear their name, and they would be coaching.
Yes.
And then they would move on into McNary High School, and they'd win statewide honors. And for me, who majored in PE in the 60s, this was just a joy to watch anybody could play. Like you watch the Olympics today, the number of women, and we got more women into coaching. I coached Little League Baseball just because I had a son, but softball would have been a fun, it just came together.
Was it an effect of basically the younger girls coming out and watching the boys kind of thing, or was there something else to it?
I think there were a group of parents
Yes.
who wanted their daughters to play, the equality of softball with baseball.
Some of them even played on the
Yes,
baseball teams.
yes, they did, a couple.
That we allowed, but then they went over and moved eventually into the softball.
Was that a point of discussion at the
Yes.
time, or?
Yes, there were several points of discussion. One of them was the gals playing baseball. Another one was, to me, was a real one, was how fast we could draft, because it is a draft system, and so the coaches would get together in the evenings and have a draft system. And there was quite an argument when I was on the board in the early 80s about they couldn't, from T-ball, draft up into the majors, that they had to go through the 2 minor steps. That was a big one, because a lot of they were there to have fun, not for what some of the coach fathers wanted. And that was a big decision as far as I was concerned, for child development and the kids to have fun. It was always about the kids.
And to follow up on that, I think that's the key thing about Little League that's different than the other programs, even nowadays, is that Little League was for all kids. We didn't have a cut program. Yeah, I mean, all kids got to play. And sometimes we had 12 or 13, 14 kids on T-ball teams.
I had 17 on my T-ball team.
But I think that's the difference between Little League and some of the other programs, is that Little League offered it to every child, no matter what. And I know that one of my kids played a couple of years and decided, no, that's enough.
Yep.
None of my kids went on to McNary, except for one. The other ones didn't, but one of them went on to McNary and played softball and all of that. But the other kids found other things and so forth, but at least they had the opportunity and exposure to play that, and that's what Little League gave us. So we just took all the kids, no matter what, and put the teams together, and then the better kids, of course, ended up being on the tournament teams and going on from there.
Yeah, and all the kids playing was really important, but also
yes.
having that success outside the league was also important. You know, we've mentioned already that, and you brought up softball, and both baseball and softball have been really successful outside of the league. Dave and I had daughters in a group that played for the state championship twice as Little League, in the Little League program, and twice at McNary High School. And the boys have won, they've won 3 state championships in baseball and second place one at a time. I might even be missing one there, but so between baseball and softball, we've been in that final game a lot. And I know Vic Backlund always talked about how important the Little League development was.
We were his farm team.
Yeah.
Well, the fact that it was for all kids, I think, is what was so important and made Little League successful, because we had coaches clinics, we had umpire clinics, we had scorekeeping clinics, and I know I was umpiring a minor league game one time, and a coach displayed, to me, the wrong behavior. And we did not hesitate to eject a coach that was in it for the win and not for the kids. So I think those lessons were taught early on. And to backtrack a little bit, fundraising was a big thing in getting the program going, but the managers and coaches knew that one of their responsibilities, without being asked, was to get a team mother and to have the mother handle the fundraising of the teams. And it was a given. Every child got candy or whatever we were selling that year, and they were expected to get rid of all of it, sell it. And there were no questions. Everybody just did it.
And I think it's important, since this is history, there's one person, actually his mom and dad and him, that is worth mentioning.
His last name was Nelson?
Yeah, Danny Nelson. Danny Nelson, every year that I was president, and the year before and the year after, I think, sold more tickets than any. What we did is we bought a bicycle for the winning ticket seller. And what you did is you sold $1 ticket. You buy one, get one free at Burger King. And there was nothing into it except the printing. I think somebody even donated that.
Yep.
But Danny Nelson sold more tickets between his mom and his dad taking him to work and him going around the neighborhood. And you should have seen it. That was, I think computers might have just been getting in then, but they had a printout of every one of their customers, and every year they would go out and do that. But that's what the kids did. Some kids sold 10 tickets. Some kids sold 2 tickets. But Danny Nelson sold over 1,000 tickets, I think, every year. Yeah, it was incredible. Just about. Well, yeah, he did get the bike every year.
We put together a group of different prizes at different levels.
Yes.
But we can't underestimate the merchants in this town that supported all of these teams, because each one had a sponsor. It was about, in the 80s, about $250 at that time to sponsor. That was a lot of money at that time, but you would see, being the only woman, this was a fun one on the T-ball team. I had Camelia's Beauty Salon, which I thought was pretty cool. And, just the little 1 or 2 shop people would constantly support every year in and year out. And that really is what made a lot of the program viable, to buy equipment, to do things. And then at the end of the year, those businesses, bless them, would give us money, and we could all have a pizza party given by the sponsors.
And I think that the key thing about Little League, of course, is everything's volunteer. So you understand that at 6 o'clock on a Saturday morning, I'd take Mike Gaynor over to Fitzmore's Fertilizer with a tractor, and then I'd follow him with my blinking lights on, and he would we had a great big trailer with fertilizer in it, and he did all 9 fields. You just drive around, and we had that back there by 8 o'clock, we'd had it back over to the Fitzmore. So anyway, those are the kinds of things that happen. But what I wanted to address a little bit was the budget. Budget was incredible. We only had, 3 ways to make money? We had the concession stand, we had the sponsorships, and each team got a sponsor. And whoever the sponsor lady was, and Joanne did that, but we also, that was kind of rotating, whoever signed up on the board would do that. And we had some, just some wonderful people that did that. And so we had sponsorships, we had concession stand, and we had the fundraising. And those are really the only ways that we earn any money.
We never charged the kids.
We never charged the kids.
Kids never got charged.
Back then, we never charged the kids. Nowadays, I think they charge them. But when we did that, we were able to have $100,000 budget for new uniforms, baseballs, tried to send money with the kids that won. The fertilizer, we didn't get that donated. The fence posts, we didn't get them donated. We put them in, you know. The concrete, we got a good deal on. But all of that kind of money was incredible. And as long as I'm talking about, at least for me during my years, I had Carly Ross and Janine Scott took care of the concession stand. And I never worried about it. What happened was every team had a night at the concession stand. And so Janine and Carly bought all the stuff, and then maybe T-ball Astros night at the concession stand. So they had to provide like 2 or 4 maybe parents, couldn't use kids, but the parents could come up and they would work in the concession stand. It'd be a night when the kids weren't playing. I always tried to do it so that the parents could watch the kids, but the nights that they weren't, they would come up. And we had one of the best concession stands. I mean, we had 1,000 people out there at night, and there was somewhere to eat, and you can only eat so much nachos and hot dogs, but boy, they loved it. The kids down on the T-ball field, when I was doing it, we didn't keep scoring T-ball. So, but because I know you won that division. But anyway, what they were doing though is they'd play the game and they'd say, who won? And we say it was a tie. And they say, okay, now do we get to go to the concession stand? And what they do is they get a parent, and they'd rotate it on the team, would buy 25 cents for every child up at the concession stand.
All right.
So the whole team would go 100 miles an hour running up to the concession stand, and they'd all stand in line. The ladies' concession stand made them stand in line, and they'd write Cardinals at the top, and then they go through, and there was 12 Cardinals, so they would get us, you know, whatever it was, 50 cents or whatever, and then the parent would have to come in and pay that bill, and that would be part of it, so.
Eric, if I can take over facilitation just for 1 second here. Dave, I think we ought to talk about there are 2 major buildings out there that have been really instrumental in the success of the place out there. The field house and the new concession stand that's there now, and you were central to both of those. I think you ought to talk about those 2.
Okay. I was telling you about the semi-truck trailer we kept getting vandalized. Somebody would come down there and they'd vandalize it, and they'd throw the uniforms out on the ground. Nobody knew about spray paint back then, I guess, but everything was out in the ground, and there was no real security. And back then, I think you probably had a garage full of stuff, Marion.
Oh, yes.
All the coaches, you know, they keep it over the year rather than take it out
Right.
there, because they wanted their uniforms to look the best, because
The
they were going to
best.
be the coach next year. So Rick and I and a few others, I can't remember who drew the plans for that. You remember?
No, I don't.
Anyway.
I made some early sketches, but I didn't draw the plans for it. Maybe Ray did. Ray Cox?
No, I don't think Ray did. Anyway, we developed a plan for the field house, and we knew that we needed a place for the tractor and the lime for the field. Back in the old days, we used that, and all the rakes and the shovels and all that kind of stuff. And we had as we've talked about, the fields sloped down, so we built a daylight basement type thing with all the field stuff going down below. And then up atop, we had softball going by then and baseball, and we needed a field house. We needed a place for the board meetings. So I think they've changed things since then, but what we did is have a room for the meetings, And then as you proceed to the other half of it, one side was for baseball gear and one side was for softball gear. And Clint Holland at the time, and that's a guy that should be memorialized anywhere, because that guy has done more for Kaiser Little League than many, many people. I mean, there's a few other folks, but he's done true. Anyway, he was in charge, so we had different bins, and so we had, I don't know, however many teams we got, we had a different bin, and all the uniforms for that would go in there with the bats and balls and everything, and then he'd check them over, and if they weren't any good, then he'd add new equipment. Not every team got it every year, but depending on the equipment. And then the other thing that we did, because we were winning trophies right and left back then, the front part of the building has a big window with a sliding, have you been out there? You've seen that sliding. And so we decided to put that in there and put all of our trophies inside so that we could show them off. So every night, part of your field duty, whoever got the duty as a board director, would open that up and make sure that everybody saw. We didn't put the flags up every night because that had taken an hour to put all the flags up. But we had all those trophies there that people could see.
How many acres? We've not said how many acres the fields are.
Well, it's 16 where the ball fields are, and I think what the city ended up buying though maybe was 23 because it included some land down
over the
towards
hill.
that church that's
Yeah.
just south of there.
Yeah.
That's 16 acres, I think, is what I remember.
For the record, the city ended up buying the property with urban renewal money. So then they came into the possession of the city, and the way that it has been run has been always on a contract with Little League or whoever has it now, youth baseball.
Right.
Something like that. So that's how it became into our possessions as a city.
Well, I think that's a whole story we ought to get into at least briefly here a little bit.
Okay.
Okay, do you want to follow up with the buildings yet?
Oh, yeah, talk about concession stand. 'cause-
Yeah, let me talk a little more about, so the buildings so then the concession stand was built 3 or 4 years later. We had it inspected by the health department, and the guy at the health department at that time said, this is the only Class A concession stand in the state. That's how much detail we put on it. And Carly Ross and Janine Scott helped me design that concession stand so that it would be easy for them. And we designed it that way. But both of those buildings were built with community donations by the businesses, but also by parents. We had parents out there that their kids, they were in a building trade, or they owned a construction company.
Right.
And Bill Leiden, at the time, Leiden Construction, he and his brother, we used all of their subs. And he was putting a real arm twist on the subs he said, I don't mind because you don't have kids in the program, but he says you have to give them half of what you would normally bill. So the guy that did the big foundation, I mean, that Daylight Basement Foundation was incredible. And that sat there for a while till we got somebody to do the framing stuff. But on both of those buildings, and I haven't been out there in a while, but that's the one thing I made sure is we had a sign that listed everybody involved in each building. And I hope it's still out there. But that was important to me. When we asked people to participate, all we could give them was their name on a sign. But that's how things, got built.
Speak about when the property was bought by the city?
Yeah, and that was a situation where it was almost like stars and the cosmic lined up for all these things to come together. But as we said earlier, this was a piece of property that was surplus property owned by the State of Oregon Highway Division. And at the time we built it, it looked like construction was a long ways off. But then suddenly the parkway was built and ODOT was saying, okay, we're ready to sell the property. Well, this was, 23 acres of industrially zoned property. And I don't know how much that'd been worth, but it would have been way more than what Kaiser Little League could have purchased. When ODOT sells property, if they're not selling it to another governmental entity, it has to go to auction. So we would have had to participate that way, and we never would have got it. But as stars lined up, the city of Kaiser was incorporated not very long before that, and Bob Newton was on the charter's council. And so it really worked out that we were able to get the city's support, and ODOT could sell that property directly to the city. And somebody else here might know more of the details, but I know that Senator Houck at that time got involved and became a supporter. And in the end, the city of Kaiser was be able to buy that property at really a bargain rate.
130,000?
Yeah.
Oh, I think it was closer to 90.
Yeah, it was
That's
right
something
around
we ought to
that-
look up.
Right around that $100,000 mark. And I don't know what the deal was. I know they had to pay back the portion that the federal government put into buying the property in the first place. And so that's how it became a Kaiser City Park in the first place. I think without that, without Bob being there, we probably would have lost the property.
Yeah. I was just
What year
gonna,
was it? I'm sorry, I wasn't there. What year was that?
The property was actually purchased in 1985.
Yeah.
I only know that because I looked at some stuff here this morning.
and I remember that meeting because Kaiser City Hall wasn't here that time. And somebody had the foresight to realize that this was going to be a big meeting. So we went to McNary High School, and we had it in their cafeteria over there. And we had at that time we had 1,000 kids. So all their parents were there. Do you remember that meeting?
I do.
We're in that cafeteria, standing room only. If the fire marshal would have come over, he'd have kicked us out.
Yes.
But all of those people that have put all their sweat and effort into this were there, and we convinced the city. Of course, it didn't take a lot of convincing with Bob on the council. He had already arm twisted everybody, and
That was
probably-
like beating up motherhood and apple pie,
Yeah.
But having all the parents there, that was the selling point, I think.
Well, it was a community effort. I mean, it was totally community. Of all the years that I've lived here, that's been one of the biggest things was this fields. And we had to have the entity to buy it, which was the city. And they put in urban renewal money that was coming from the government. So it worked out just beautifully. Like you said, the stars all aligned. There's one thing that I would like to make sure that stays on record, or that we get it on record, is we do have these presentations of the history of all of this that will be put in the museum and on tape, so anybody can come in and reference them. We will be adding more to it with some discussion from Harry Pease and some other people to continue to make this very available to the public. If they want to come in and look at these tapes and pictures, we think it's a wonderful asset to add to the museum and to the city for Kaiser points of interest.
So, in my next question, this might be kind of for you, Rick, maybe to see what other people pick up on with it. What are the topics that we haven't discussed about today that you might know, or either any of the three of you might know about that I wouldn't be aware of, that you'd want to make sure people understood about the history of Kaiser Little League or the park out there?
Well, number one, I think volunteerism is the most important thing and what got the league off the ground.
I think
Yeah,
Marion's right. It could have not, it would have never happened without some vision of some people that happened to come together all along, and the individual strengths that each one of us brought to it. I mean, the National Guard that Bob and Marion were involved in, Rick with his abilities with the state and the connection, and I just raised money. That was the easy part. But it was the engineers and the other gentleman that had the vision, and I think we have a list of the original people that were involved, so that should be on record someplace, that just had the vision and the ambition to do this, and it's all volunteers, but it was all for the kids. We live here, and we wanted it for the kids and our legacy.
There's two other subjects maybe I would just hit on, Eric. Dave mentioned Clint Holland earlier, and I wanted to make sure that we did talk about him. He wasn't there in this initial construction, but boy, for years and years, Clint not only coached teams and took them to the next higher level and all those sorts of things, but he was out there night and day keeping the water running. He was instrumental in getting the lights on the senior field. He's probably put as many hours out there as anybody, especially during the off seasons when everybody else kind of their attention goes to other things. Clint was always out there making sure everything was in place. There was one other comment I was going to make on another subject, but Dave, were you going to say something?
The reason that field complex became so successful and so good, the actual physical thing, was a philosophy that Mike Gaynor taught me because he was Little League president before me, and I tried to pass it on to everybody, is somebody would come up and they'd say, boy, that fence needs to be fixed. I hope they get that done. And they said our whole motto out there is they are we. And so anytime anything needed to be done, like the person would say, I hope they fix it, whoever they said it to, or if we heard about it, we'd go and say, let me show you how to do that, Rick. And they would become even a more integral part of the complex. And nobody hesitated. They understood that part. Mm-hmm. We didn't have very many people that did that. I mean, I had a couple of kids at night, at 9:30 at night, when I was closing up everything and it was dark, that were still at the front of the gate waiting for somebody to pick them up or having to walk home or looking for a ride. But we didn't have very many of those. No. Most every parent from Keizer that had kids was involved, and it's the they are we. And that really worked. Don't go past what Rick's done, because there's pictures in here of the one that we just talked about of the wall we poured one day, and we blocked it, used the blocking of the tractor. There was also a day out on the senior field when we poured that wall for the scorer's booth. Remember that one? So there's Rick was really involved, and between concrete and fence post, there's not too many people who had done more than what he did, that's for sure.
And I also wanted to make sure that we give proper due to Ray Cox. His name maybe has come up here a little bit. Ray's not with us any longer, and we all miss him for that. But Ray was a civil engineer. He worked for a company, he built highway and other construction projects, so he really had access to construction equipment. He knew how to organize construction activities. And there's so many people here that this wouldn't have happened without that person's contribution. And Ray is certainly right at the top of that list. The one other comment I wanted to make is, and I don't know if it's appropriate for this history, Joanne, or not, but a few years ago, Keizer Little League split, and then in Keizer, KYSA, both organizations have been playing out there. And there have been some little bit of rocky road about that arrangement. Dave and I are sitting on a task force to look at how that field could be, or that complex could be managed in the future. And boy, what I've got to say is those two organizations, those two presidents are dead set committed to working together on this. I really think the future is much brighter for the kids playing out there. Even if there continues to be two organizations, I think they're going to really, as far as the complex is concerned, operate as one. So I'm really optimistic about that.
I would just like to have Marion, as part of this oral history, talk about, she's got a list of the presidents, and I'd like that someplace in this oral history. And I would also like the first 6 or the Dirty Dozen also on record here in the oral history. So what is the best way for us to handle this?
I mean, do you just want to have them read it off, Joanne, or how do you want to approach
I
that?
just think that before us, there was people that really had the vision in the beginning, and they should be recognized on this oral history. So Marion, why don't you read the presidents and who they were, what years? You've got it right there.
I have the presidents. I do not know who the first core of people were
Okay.
that got Little League
Rick has it.
started.
No.
No, this is the field guy.
This is in '72 when
Right.
Max was an integral
We'll-
part of
We'll do
that.
some work on that.
We need to find
We
more
will.
information on that. But I have presidents from '72 to '92, and up until '76, we had 50 teams, or by '76, we had 50 teams, baseball and softball. You want the names?
Yes.
Well, Keith Mitchell was the first in '72 and '73, followed by Dick Allender in '74, John Lewis, '75, Denny Rayburn, '76, myself, '77, Anita Heath, '78 and '79, Bill Rumpf, '80, '81, and '82. He held the
critical years.
record for 3 years. Mike Gaynor, '83 and '84, Ed Davis, '85 and '86, Dave Bauer, '87, '88. '89, we had a kind of a team presidency that year with Arlene Perenboom and Mike Gaynor. 1990,
That's because Arlene had passed away.
Yes.
She
in
had a
office.
heart attack.
yes.
In office.
Thank you. 1990 was Larry Konecki, and also 91, and then Tom Bauer in 92. And beyond that, I did not have them on my list.
Well, we'll get them and make sure it gets in
I think the
record.
books may show that, and I think we have most of the books, one of my sons. And you have a list of the Dirty Dozen?
Yeah, what I've got here is the Dirty Dozen plus 3, so I've got
Okay,
15.
okay.
Joanne Belkey, Don Blevins, Roy Ebel, Mike Gaynor, Mike Hilfiker, Dave Johnson, Bob Newton, Gary Whitmer, Bob Bevins, Ray Cox, Del Fischler, Gary Gogol, Larry Horn, Rick Keene, and Bill Rumpf.
And they met on Saturday mornings for breakfast.
Yeah, I was gonna say, when you took Mike over to get fertilizer at 6, that means you didn't go to breakfast at Bray's that morning.
So my last question for you guys, and it's more just an opportunity to speak of something that's important to you. You've made the focus of this, really, it was always about the kids. And I'm sure each of you had experiences that you kind of draw on, even now, stories that you remember about certain ones or individuals or just an experience you had with given teams. Would you be willing to share one of those experiences each that just really sticks out in your mind as like the epitome of what Little League meant to you and maybe the community?
Sure, I'll start it off, let the others think. I became the T-ball manager for my T-ball team. It was draw 'em out of a hat. There was no drafting. And that year, the stars aligned, and I got some very, very talented players. And there was this one particular family that had just moved here from Hawaii, and they had sons that could really play. And he became so, so his abilities were so much more than the rest of the boys. It was fun to watch him, and it was really tough to watch him maybe get going on to the majors his second year, because he would have sat on a bench, and those kind of things. But one of the biggest things is you had to remember when you were coaching that these were just little guys. And I would have some of my team real strong, like this young boy, and then the others that brought their Tonka trucks that played out on first and second, out in center field and that. It just was from the top to the bottom, and that's what made it absolutely delightful. But that we went in and won the championship the year that was, and then one little boy whose father is a bank manager here in town brought me cupcakes that said the world's greatest manager. So it was just kind of fun. Old Bill Tucker and I and our boys, and we just had a good time. That's my recollection.
I think mine is not necessarily the kids. It's of the people that made the opportunities for the kids. Didn't know Rick before, been lifelong friends. And that's with many, many of my friends. And the people that I met at the Little League fields that helped build the buildings, that helped put in the fence post or rake Gib Gilmore and I were out there one night at 9:30 at night with the headlights of our cars on to mow the fields because there was going to be an early game the next morning. Those are the kinds of things that I remember most. It's the kids, but it's the parents giving the kids the opportunities. And I think that is, well, from somebody who's lived in Keizer all his life, that's something special about Keizer, whether it be the fire department, the Rotary Club, the city, whatever it be. That's the kind of thing you don't get everywhere. And I guess that's what I take away from it.
I think I have two or three. I've got several pictures at home that I've taken at different times where I've gone up clear at the west end of the complex, up on the bank where you're up above the senior field, and from there you can see the whole complex. And I've gone up there, and when every field had games going on, just to see all those people out there, 10 different games, and like Dave said earlier, probably 1,000 people there at one time. Especially early in the spring when the fields are really in great shape and grass is all green and stuff. So just seeing that and seeing everybody there in one community is one of my memories. And then other times, and maybe it happened more during the All-Star season, I don't know, but when up to the front where the flagpole is, on a Saturday morning, putting the flag up, and it's a beautiful morning, and and the flag's kind of furling, and the flowers that we planted are blooming, just to sit there and take that in was another great memory. And another one that really does have to do with winning, and we keep saying it's not about winning, but winning's not a bad thing either, was when our girls went to the World Series and took third place in 1991 at the softball World Series. And when they came back and they had a Keizer police escort down River Road, and all the girls just so excited. Yeah. And most of the Little League organization turned out. We had a ceremony there. That was a pretty cool day too.
Because I was involved in the beginning more than anything else, the first 20 years of Little League, I just focus on the volunteerism. It was just phenomenal. And my second humorous aspect of Little League was playing at Keizer School and the T-ball teams, because I would go around to different teams just to be supportive. And we had lots of molehills. There was no grassy, beautiful field. It was just a field that got mowed maybe every 2-3 weeks. But the little guys who came with their Hot Wheels in their pocket, they weren't sure they really wanted to play baseball, and they were there probably more for their parents, I would guess. But they would be out there going over the molehills, building forts in the soil. If a ball came out to them, another fielder came and got it. They just continued to play with their Hot Wheels. And that is one of the most memorable things for me because it is all about the kids. And no matter what level, if you're an all-star, if you're just a participant, it was fun. And I don't remember any kids not having fun.
The only other thing that needs to be in the record, and he didn't bring it, when it comes to T-ball, there are some rules for T-ball. And Rick Keene wrote those rules.
Oh, and Mike Gaynor.
And Mike Granter, they wrote these rules.
Yeah, they were the unwritten rules
The
before we
unwritten-
wrote them
that's-
Yeah, I
down.
was gonna say, we always had rules, but you're right.
But can you just share a couple? And somehow that needs to get in here somewhere.
Yeah, like one was, never look for your, when your team's up to bat, never look for your glove until the last batter's out. Otherwise, you'll show no confidence in that batter. Just stuff like that. Oh, yeah, no matter how many batting helmets a team has, all the kids want to use the same one. Just stuff like that.